public-private partnerships, residential investment, affordable housing, land development. So kind of takes that whole piece that impacts in terms of place, and we try and walk the talk. So actually, the reason why today is so important to me is actually if we do things to our communities, we're failing. If we do things with our communities and we look and feel like our community, we make them successful. If we make them successful, our clients benefit from that. And there's a whole social mobility that happens alongside this. So everything that we do and everything we'll talk about now is so relevant to place in the industry that we work in and why. I'm also have the privilege of being the chair of Real Estate Balance. I took that role on 12 months ago. I tell this story all the time. I went through 3 interviews for a job that's penny money. My husband thought I went bonkers, but I did that because it's really, really important that it's somebody who passionately believed in what they were doing and is prepared to put the hours in rather than just simply wear the badge. And Real Estate Balance is in its 10th anniversary year. It is an amazing organisation with 130 plus members now. And the purpose is solely to accelerate diversity and inclusion across the industry. And we focus on 3 things. When they started, it was a focus solely on gender and improving that gender balance. Now moving to equity and social mobility. And today, therefore, the passion for me is all about social mobility. And we've got a fantastic panel who I'm going to ask to introduce the stats. They always do it better than I do. And it avoids me having to put their names forward in the wrong way. So kind of I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to really kind of kick out on actually how can we improve these pathways into it, and how can we keep growing that social mobility across our industry. So Jo, do you want to start up with the introduction?
I can do. Thank you very much, Jo. 3 Joes on the panel today. I hope that
Yeah, where's the diversity?
I'm Jo Dancy, and I'm Director of Regions. For those of you who don't know us, we are communications specialists in development, the built environment and infrastructure. So we do political engagement, stakeholder, and most importantly for this conversation, community engagement.
Annelise?
I'm Annelise. I'm the Impact ESG and EDI Director at Better Society Capital. We're a UK-based impact investor seeking to tackle social issues and inequalities in the UK, and I focus on across the whole investment process.
Hi, and I'm Sam Monger. I'm head of place-based impact investing at The Good Economy. We are a small impact advisory firm, so we help impact investors decide how to invest their money to have the most impact in places around the UK. And obviously, social mobility is a big part of that. And with my other hat on, I've been very involved with Real Estate Balance for a while, and helped set up and still get involved in managing the survey and now the benchmarking tool, which is very exciting. So trying to help the sector to measure its own social mobility and how it compares with its peers.
So I'm the third Joe on the panel. So I'm Joey Aoun, lead sustainability implementation here at Savills Investment Management. I work closely with the fund teams, and this is what I will be throwing on in my conversation today, like my collaborations with the fund teams, how we make things happen on the ground when it comes to social mobility, but as well as I will reflect on my experience as being a member in the DNI social mobility group that Noel just introduced. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
So guys, there's your panel, and I'm going to start straight with you, Korea. I'm going to open with a really simple question to all of you. So let's just talk about what social mobility means to you, how it resonates to where you've got to into your career, but also how it impacts on your daily experience.
Yes, a good question to start with, actually. So social mobility, the way I would see it in simple ways, it's providing equitable, inclusive environment for everyone and everyone capitalized to thrive, disregarding their own backgrounds. Specifically, this might be targeting disadvantaged backgrounds, like individuals that they're coming from low-income households, or their first time joining university in their family, their first generation to do so, or some others that they're coming from underrepresented community groups based on their ethnicity or race, or even some key workers that they have limited access to certain facilities. So this is in a nutshell, but we can reflect on the same topic from a corporate organization perspective, where this will help in facilitating fair wages, employment, securing employment opportunity, but as well as access to education through apprenticeship schemes and work experience days. From a real estate perspective, the simple example will be someone being able to go to university just because her parents secured a stable housing, affordable housing, well connected in an area, or someone else who have a better spending because they are in a house recently retrofitted, saving some £500 a year for additional spending on other necessities.
That's it. And I'm going to be biased to Joe, so I'm going to be this Joe next.
Thanks. So I gave this a lot of thought because obviously there's a whole sphere of understanding of social mobility, and I think for me, in terms of the work that we do, it's the marriage of opportunity and a clear path to get where you're going with attitude. I think it has to be accompanied by a sense of belief and a sense of pride to actually then marry the two together and develop social mobility. Because of what we do with Kanda, I think in terms of community engagement, when that works well, it can be massively transformational. When we do our jobs well and the clients and the investors are invested, communities feel comfortable in engaging in the process. They feel heard, they feel uplifted, they feel valued. There's an opportunity then for us as developers and as developers teams to broker connections for those communities with some of these employers, with some of the skills providers. We can also ensure that they can get involved in a meaningful way so that they're actually helping to physically shape these spaces, which will be better for them in the long term, develop better quality of places for work, for social spaces, for living even. And I think more than anything, the sense of pride that can be developed from good community engagement can lead to really positive community catalysts for further projects within the community, which can lead to that social mobility. So I think it can be transformational, but only with the buy-in of the investor and the developer client.
Fantastic. Annelise, do you want to build on that, your experience where you sit?
Yeah, definitely. So I think social mobility is very much core to BSE's mission. As I mentioned, EDI in general is core to BSE's mission to tackle social inequalities and social issues in the UK, and social mobility is one key part of that. So we look at this at two levels, both with the fund managers that we work with. So how are they thinking about social mobility and EDI internally in their own operations, thinking about what is our influence as an investor to increase and improve these practices, and then also down to the level of the communities that the portfolio seeks to serve. So having a very strong focus on the who, so focusing on underserved and disadvantaged people. This includes people on low incomes, people experiencing homelessness, people in different geographies that are with higher regional inequality in the UK. So we place, as I mentioned, both quite a deep focus at both levels.
Fantastic. And Sam, before I come to you, I mean, what I'm hearing is that actually it's those funds taking it seriously and having social mobility kind of tests and criteria within their funding board, which is really accelerating in parts of this work. Sam, what's your experience and what's the data telling us?
Well, I think, so the data in terms of the real estate balance survey tells us that, as you might expect, the real estate industry is less representative of different social demographics than the population as a whole. But in some ways, it's no worse than some of the other professions. But I guess what my observation would be, so I guess I came into real estate slightly by accident, and it's always struck me coming into real estate that the number of people who work in real estate who came in because their parents did it. And I've been to speak at my kids' schools, like at careers fairs before, and the number of people who come up to you and go, real estate, what's that? You know, it just isn't as visible. So I think there's a real challenge about how do you help people understand what it is and how they can get into it. So I think that's the kind of internal piece to it. I think on the external piece, I mean, there's some really good data out there now that helps map the picture in terms of social mobility and opportunity around the country. So Sutton Trust recently came out with an opportunity index, and then there's the Social Mobility Commission's own index as well. And I think that's really helpful for people in the property industry, because you can literally look at a map around the country and see, if I'm active in this place, what are the challenges here and how do I address those? There's a lot of data available that can really help drive that now.
And that is critical, isn't it? So it's pinpointing where we need to focus our time. So real estate bank is very key to make sure that we identify what the issues are, and then we help our members to resolve those issues or actually to make an impact on those issues. It's really important, that data, isn't it? So a little please encourage you all to fill out your surveys when they come to you on an biannual basis. So let's just kind of take and build on that. We'll talk about promoting it. We'll talk about how we communicate and how we invest into social mobility. I'm really keen to understand what the benefits are. So what do we get back from it? Because actually, one of the things we're not very good at is monetizing it, is it? So kind of like you monetize it, the impact it has is so much more. So what do you think we get back from it, and how do we demonstrate that investment?
So I would say, certainly from what we do, we're not at the coalface of that data, but we are at the coalface with those communities. And where we struggle is to communicate, to have the data behind us, to have the strength to incentivize our developer clients to actually see the value in doing it. And I think as well for residents, residents spend so long fighting developers sometimes, and developers fighting residents, that the two act in complete silos, which means that all of these wonderful positive benefits of working together can be missed. So I think from our side of things, I think there needs to be almost more communication, messaging, narrative around those key benefits, both for communities and also for our clients, to make sure that it's actually part of the DNA of what we're all doing, rather than, potentially just an awareness day like today, or some protocols that people have to tick off within a company. So I would like to see more evidence, because I don't feel like I know enough about it, and we're at the coalface with those communities.
But perhaps we can get Annelise, how do you think that it kind of like really you promote it in terms of the fund that you work?
So I think, as we've talked about before, data is key. Only until you have the data, then you know where the gaps are, to then be able to know what are the areas that you need to fix. I appreciate that this in itself is already quite a challenge in terms of diversity data collection, in particular with social mobility. We have an EDI fund manager survey, which some of us have thankfully filled out. And we have structured it to have the 3 questions that the Social Mobility Commission recommend to ask. So parental occupation, when you're 14, whether you received free school meals, and the type of school that you attended. What we have found from doing the survey over the last 2 years is that it's 3 questions. It's a lot already to ask people compared to other characteristics where it's usually on one generally. And then these questions also feel a bit more private, because we're also asking information about parents. So what we're now looking to do, and this is also following recommendations from Progress Together, is to just focus on one question. So on parental occupation at age 14, this is a question that is applicable across different geographies. A lot of these other questions are more applicable in a UK context. And then from there, if you focus on one, increase data coverage, and then be able to glean better insights, which then you can feed back into your decision making. So that's it's just going back to the data challenge, and I appreciate that there's more work to do there, but only until you have that, then you know where you're going to act.
So if we're waiting for the data to come in to see how we're influencing social mobility into our industry, how are we bringing them in, Joey? How are you bringing in social mobility, and how are we ensuring we've not got people who just in property?
So from an organizational perspective, we have like a social mobility group that I mentioned in the business, where we managed to bring nearly 20 volunteers of the business in the past year, providing more than 80 hours of coaching for more than 50 pupils across 3 schools. So it starts with cultural change, cultural shift within the organization. And this is supported by other HR initiatives, such as our partnership with Investment 2020, where we hired on the back of this program 4 of individuals from disadvantaged background with 100% retention to date. So this starts with a cultural shift within the organization. But when it comes at an investment perspective, we have some strategies or product that they're focused on delivering social impact, such as the affordable homes, one that Annelise is involved in as well. And so on the affordable homes, the strategy, we have a set of impact criteria, ranging from a percentage of social value delivered, the percentage of discounted market trend based across the average portfolio that we have, or even some criteria about the quality of the portfolio that we're owning, with higher EPCs, i.e. lower operational cost and maximizing the affordability of our own tenants. So setting these criteria, but most importantly, part of our due diligence, technical due diligence scope for any new acquisitions, it stretches beyond environmental criteria to capture the social ones, and some of which will reflect the social mobility aspects, i.e. access to transport, what's the distance to the main hubs that we have. And we capture these for two reasons. One is to do our due diligence investigation of what has been said initially beyond the environmental piece that's gaining momentum. But second is to achieve continuity between what happened on the ground with the developers or at the construction local authority or housing association and us and our management to have this accountability for the social agenda as well.
So this is a different to what you need to do for regulations and secure planning. This is actually what you as a fund are expecting your developments to deliver.
Exactly. Even beyond the products that they just focus on the strategy for any other product that we own. So we prioritize this agenda.
This plays perfectly into my view that actually those fund managers setting those criteria at the beginning is accelerating the change in the process. It should help you though, in terms of what happens when you're down on the ground.
Yeah.
Consultant.
I mean, I think one of the key things that we see, and I've been doing this for 25 years now, is when it really works and when it's effective and when it goes through planning quickly, is when we've gone in at the very, very early stage, even at the fund stage, and had those conversations, not just with planning policy officers, because in many occasions they're just, computer says no, and it's just planning policy. Sorry to any planners in the room. Yeah, apology. But the key thing is these senior politicians are representatives of their communities. They know what works, what doesn't, what the problems are. And I think when development works really well is when you're having that dialogue and you're understanding what are the problems in the area that this development could solution. And I think that, that wins so much credit, I think, and also then ensures that the development that's coming forward feels like a development that is for everybody. It's not just an us and them. The barriers go up. It's an isolated development. It's much more, it bleeds much more into the existing community. And I think those early conversations are where, we bang our heads against the wall about it, saying, can we have them? Can we have them? Because that's when it works.
Absolutely. Sam, anything on that?
Yeah, I think going back to the point about what's the value of it, I think, for example, probably two areas. One is just the kind of license to operate point. And I think, if you ever look at the kind of the public opinion around, public trust of different types of institutions, developers don't score particularly highly often. And so the more you can do to demonstrate that you're actually being serious about this type of stuff, the more likely you are to, get to the table, get stuff through planning without too many objections. In some cases, get the community on your side and have a positive support from the community. So that's a really important point. And then the other thing I'd say is that one of the things I'm working on a lot at the moment is, many of you will know, the government's been doing a big review around pensions policy, and it's pushing both the local government pensions side and a number of the defined contribution schemes through the Mansion House Accord to really do more in terms of investing in private markets, including in real estate around the country, with a particular objective around supporting the government's growth mission, but also its missions around social inclusion. So there's basically a large pool of money that's looking for good things to invest in that can demonstrate they have these credentials. So, the timing is really good to be focusing on this stuff.
Just slightly on that. So what are the criteria that they're using? How can we learn from what you?
I mean, I think it's a really big opportunity because there are relatively few who've done it so far. So the likes of Greater Manchester have been doing it for a while, so it's worth looking at what they've been able to achieve. A lot of it requires, a strong level of collaboration between the local government pension side and its equivalent local authorities. But there's a long list of pension funds who have really barely touched the surface on this stuff yet. So there's a really big kind of area for development.
That makes sense. Greater Manchester pension funds is a really good example, isn't it?
Yeah.
REB was at an event only 3 weeks ago where we were talking about actually social inclusion and actually what they were asking their members to do. Just sign up to Work Experience, you sign up to their program.
Yeah.
Which means not just you paid them, that you get them into the capital. They experience the whole experience of coming to work. So that actually it is a real net benefit in terms of actually how you change and interact with current people. I mean, it's a beautiful DJ link, and I thank you for it, Sal, in terms of certainly with yesterday was Red Roost and Expo yesterday, everything now is moving into a public and private sector partnership. You know, if you went to UK Reef or if you went to Biffin, you know, if you were playing UK Reef bingo, that was the one that won most of the time, public-private partnerships. And it's huge, isn't it, in terms of actually the ability to really, you know, accelerate social mobility was the reason something you were talking about. And Annelise, what's your thoughts on it? How that's going to impact, how it impacts for you?
So this is one of the things that BC has been pushing forward, and then also through our public affairs team advocating for government to do more on this, but then also showing examples of this happening in our portfolio. So we have also invested in the residents homelessness support funds, where they partner with local authorities, and local authorities send refer people on the waiting lists to the homes that residents provide. And we have also published research done by Alma Economics to demonstrate the amount of savings that this has generated for local authorities. What the research demonstrates is that for every £1 of public and private investment, this generates 2.3 pounds of financial and social value over the next 10 years. This is basically the money that local authorities would be spending on temporary accommodation anyways, but then the added benefit of well-being benefits of the wraparound care that residents provide. So this is a clear example of a public-private partnership then delivering more value for the local and central governments and society as a whole.
So I'm going to stick with the fence. of Joey, what's your experience working in public private sector? And do you see a difference in the speed of your ability to influence?
Yeah, I think it makes it or breaks it, this public-private partnership. So I can speak about a recent asset that we own in Hamburg, and the situation that we had where there is a change in the rent control regulation locally. So Hamburg, since 2018, they started for senior living a rent controlled cap for affordability, with initially a plan that's going to finish by 2025, just now. Without providing any broader initiatives to support this. This meant that it made it less of a return, less of financially driven initiative for investors, developer to invest in this area, in those affordable units, which meant the supply went down. And now the 2025 deadline is approaching, and without any certainty of what's coming next. So we might reverse back on this asset to market rent. On a stepped graded approach. So this is one situation where it's adding pressure. Another one that might be a success is the one in Helsinki in Finland. So they had the same approach of initiating those rented capped for affordability, but there they had a longer term plan of 40 years. So one, it's providing stability for investors. Plus, it's supported by other initiatives such as green loans or even reduced land prices, public land prices on longer lease, and some other initiatives to make faster planning where usually developers and investors incur higher costs. So this initiative package alongside their rental cap worked nicely, and this is a success because it's providing a good, predictable future, one that can be studied, and to make it a returnable investment in this area.
Fascinating. It's to actually have these real experiences that are happening longevity. Then, as we wake up this morning, just going through the nitty-gritty of what actually the affordable housing change has been for us. Some elements of that public and private sector piece that you're observing.
Yeah, and I think first of all, I'd say going back to what I was saying earlier about the data, is you need to start with a kind of clear sense of what the needs of the place are, and where that works best is where you start from a kind of place coalition, basically. So you have the relevant bits of local government working alongside other key institutions like maybe university and NHS trust, all of which have a real stake in, like, you know, is there enough housing for students or for the NHS workforce or for other groups? So getting that, and that's one of the things that Greater Manchester have done quite well in terms of the local government bit, getting a level of cohesion there. So having that really clear place-based view, so it's for the place to determine what our needs are, and obviously from the local government perspective, they've got the connection into the community they're the ones who are accountable to their community. So that sort of defines the demand side of the equation, and then you've got a really clear starting point, and then you can bring in the private institution investors alongside public funding to work out how do we collectively finance all of this. And so you can look at the sort of models that Better Society Capital get involved in alongside private sector institutions as well. I think as an aside, there's a real opportunity on the public sector side because, historically, funds from central government have flowed down to local government in a very dysfunctional way from multiple different departments with multiple different sets of objectives attached to them. As we've started to see piloted with Greater Manchester and West Midlands, you get this single financial settlement coming through on a longer term basis. It creates the opportunity, in my mind, that you can have that sort of really long-term shared view of what outcomes we're all collectively aiming for and spend less time kind of trying to justify how you spent every pound to multiple different funding pots.
Yeah.
That's where I was going to.
Yeah, that is where I was going to go. So the public-private sector partnership thing is a really interesting one, and I think it manages a few issues. And I think one of those, obviously, is, as you've rightly pointed out, is these big projects, these large-scale schemes, these, dare I say, new towns. Are the opportunity to give that long-term investor confidence, which is great. I think where we are now is we're on the cusp of some quite monumental changes at local government level because of not just devolution, which will help with the more holistic spatial planning side of things, but at that local level, we've got local government reorganisation, which means that there's going to be a real challenge, I think, to keep that place-based approach going, because you will have, huge unitary authorities with responsibility for huge areas. But I think there is within that a real opportunity, because every development site at the moment in silo has to do everything. And the pressures on viability are astronomical. If you'll then add in additional things in with social mobility and social value and all of that, those smaller sites can't contend with it. And I think what we need to do, and what public-private sector partnerships can do, and the devolution of Homes England, which is becoming much more focused now on specific areas and in partnerships with Peterborough and places like that. I think what they can do is try to change that habit of developers working in silo. And focusing, understandably working in silo, because there are, financial competitive elements with the neighbouring development site, but somehow we need to go above that and look at sites as a whole, and don't expect every one site to deliver everything. And I think that's where, when you take that pressure off individual development sites, you might, by looking at holistically, you might then be able to say, well, this one can deliver more of this and this can deliver that, and we're not conflicting or duplicating. So I think that whether that's combined authorities, whether that's the unitaries, whether that's big private sector partnerships with the public like Homes England, I think there's a real opportunity. But we also need to make sure that the gargantuan nature of some of those things don't lose that local place-based approach.
So we've got to keep the balance between the two. So we take the first kind of 20 minutes just to really talk about the positives and the opportunities. And we've also talked about reg controls, and so therefore let's talk about what we see are the regulatory potential barriers to the success that we're having. Who wants to kind of kick off on that? Because if we don't address the barriers as well, we're not going to be able to accelerate to the speed that we need.
I gave the example of the rent control. I can give another one about where there is no system thinking from regulation when they're coming out. One is about electrification of heat. So we know at the nation level here in the UK, we have a target to electrify heat by 2035, i.e. moving away from gas boilers to electric systems. Whilst at the same time, the unit electricity price in the UK is nearly 4 times higher than the one of natural gas. So by doing this at a regulatory level, are we pushing people into affordability, energy security problems? One that we as developers or anyone that is the industry want to deliver against this regulatory commitment, but one might not be aware what they're doing as a consequence to others, especially if we're talking about shared ownership or socially rented unit. So things like that should be addressed in a holistic way, where the government, whilst they're pushing for the right things on a regulatory perspective, they should provide initiatives for on-site renewable energy to mitigate the consequences of having higher electricity bills by these being provided on site, as an example. So system thinking is key by thinking about all the consequences that comes with any regulation that's put forward.
No, I really agree. It's that whole idea is that you've got different priorities and actually one turns to the other. And anyone just sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big concerns is that there's obviously the government's trying to achieve a lot of objectives at the same time. And as we've said, there's a lot of change going on both on the local government side and on the pension side simultaneously. So I think we've got to make sure that whatever regulations are rightly needed as part of that are kind of, there's a realistic balance of actually having the right resources in order to kind of administer that effectively throughout the process. Because otherwise there's a danger that you say, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. And if the local authorities haven't got the resources in place to do that at the time, the danger is everything does drift, so you don't get anything done for a period of time. I think that's probably my main overarching kind of concern.
Causing too much change.
Yeah. So an example, we were working in a project in the Midlands, and there was a point that one of the councils involved, basically they hadn't got their heads around how to actually administer biodiversity net gain credits. So sort of schemes that had got planning consent that couldn't go forward because they hadn't actually got that mechanism in place yet, for example.
Really, totally from your point, Joey, but with that kind of electrification of the heating system, there's also issue of that actually locking people into district heating systems, which is now starting to be a problem, where you moved off on something that's really positive, but the social impacts of that from a mobility perspective, as these new homes come forward, is creating challenges. And we just need to kind of think about those. I think really what I'm hearing. Okay. Absolutely. So what we're really saying is that, not one size fits all. What we've got to do is constantly be thinking about them and reviewing and playing things like. So we've touched on data, and Sam, can you talk about certain trust? Can you just accelerate a little bit more about that? Because as we've all said, actually that data is the bit that is going to be the game changer, and the early catch of that's really important.
Yeah, I know. Just going back to the point about the community engagement piece, I mean, to an extent, that is also data, right? And I think one of the key things I've been thinking about a lot is how do we capture the value of that and make sure it has life and continues in a situation when there's often a handoff between a developer and investor or multiple investors. I think as we get more into a world where there are build to rent elements of development schemes, there's a real opportunity to pass that baton on in a way that hasn't often happened in the past. So I think that kind of having that golden thread of the kind of hard quantifiable data is really important, but actually in terms of really building that relationship with the community, it's about making sure that the things that they told you get picked up on, and you can demonstrate that you've responded to them. You can't necessarily always do everything they want, but if you can show you've taken it on board and so on. I think the broader data, I mean, that is an input into a process where you can say, okay, I can see what the challenges are in this area. A lot of it's going to be about access to decent employment opportunities and education opportunities. Now, again, an investor in a particular fund can't necessarily do all of that, but what they can do is have the conversation with the relevant universities and other providers and say, how can we work together? Because we can provide the jobs if you can provide the training to make sure that people are actually able to take those jobs, because it's rare that one organization can hit all that at once. So for me, it's about having that shared view of this is the problem and this is how we collectively fix it, and this is what I can do and this is what you can do.
And you have to open it up, right? You can't have that build it and they will come attitude. And I think, having that early dialogue with those key partners is crucial. We do a lot in the life sciences, and we do find that those clients are really, really switched on in a way that perhaps is slightly more advanced. And often that's because they are in connection with the university, but they are having much more of those innovation conversations where it's not just any old employment that will help with social mobility, but it's innovation, it's new sectors, and it's new smaller businesses that support that upward shift socially.
And we talk about access into the industry, which is where we started from. We talk about often planning requiring X amount of apprentices to go into construction angles. We are now looking as a planning in terms of town planning, but actually going into the professional sides as well. So actually, how many of those people can actually, instead of being an apprentice going to construction site, how many of those people can actually get that work experience in our industry, in the planning team, in the urban design team, in the communications team? And that must be really important in terms of capturing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've worked on a project in the Northwest for about 20 years, which was the Homes England, or I think it was English Partnerships at the beginning. They've gone through three rebrands since then, but and they were very keen to do that, and they were very keen to have meet the employer events and very simple things like that, which will allow these people to access open minds to the opportunities across those different types of jobs. Because as you said, what's real estate? Some people don't even No, so I think, yeah, that kind of opportunity and the process of planning and the process of communication is itself an opportunity for social mobility, because you are really opening up minds, opening up doors, forging relationships, brokering connections, things like that. So I think all of that is crucially important.
So we'll be talking about collaboration, talking about public private sector partnership, talking about government, so you're talking about that all in a hugely positive way. It would be wrong of me to not say, but we also are seeing companies having to respond to a change in attitude at a political level, at the highest political level, in terms of DE&I. What are the greatest risks of that from your perspective in terms of social mobility slowing down? So kind of what's the impact of what we're hearing globally, and what's your company doing? I guess probably I'm going to go to the funds, but how are you responding to the noise around D&I at the moment?
Yeah, some people are talking about the death of the NI. I wouldn't see it this way. I would see it more like a correction time, probably. It's where the tourists or the amateurs are backing away from this agenda, but while the other strong believers are doubling up. So we are one of those strong believers, luckily. So we did some initiatives that I mentioned a couple at an organization level. I can mention a few more. So part of our accountability processes internally, we have a D&I objective as a mandatory objective part of our appraisals, and not necessarily focused on social mobility, but it will capture some aspect of this. So this is one thing to have accountability for all of us here in the business. Another way to do it at the fund level is, as I mentioned, including this in our due diligence for any new acquisitions. So the social value side of things is having enough spotlight alongside all other ESG criteria that's assessed at due diligence for all investment committee, but all the fund investment teams to be aware of for any of the assets that we are acquiring. And the successful example of that we have some social mobility driven assets within wider funds that they don't necessarily focus on social mobility delivery, such as Euro Living, one of those. So we have an asset in the Netherlands, and this asset, part of the due diligence, it was captured that 50% of the units, they're targeting key workers, teachers, providing 50% discounted rent for those units. There is a social mobility hub on site to make sure that the site is well connected to bus stations and other diverse users within walkable way and commutable way. And it's quite high on terms of environmental performance, meaning nearly zero bills, i.e. freeing up some additional budgets from energy bills for other necessity spending. So it's a cultural shift, as I mentioned, that starts with the organization from within. So if we see it part of our appraisals and we're going to track against it, then this would be reflected in everything we are doing as well during our work, and being captured in wider due diligence for any assets, not necessarily one specific ones, is a key cultural shift and the success.
So the strong organizations are sticking with it. Annelise, what's your thing?
I agree with Joy. I think that it's more of correction. I think that it's just a maturing of both ESG and NEDI. It's seeing kind of who is a strong believer and who is taking the opportunity to back off of this. So that's just helping, I think, the broader market evolve and mature. So, and yeah, it is great to see it is easy to, or better to see who is actually committed to it. And personally for BSC, we're staying the course on what we were always going to do. As I stated previously, it's core to mission. So from an internal perspective, we have our ADI steering group in terms of social mobility, in particular, an area that, as I mentioned before, on data that where we weren't as strong on was collecting this characteristic. So now we're going to start to collect it. But we have been doing work like having apprenticeships, working with programs like 2027 associates, so different pathways along that. And then, as I mentioned previously, from an investment perspective, we have similar to Joey, an EDI due diligence framework. So assessing what EDI practice looks like from a governance decision making perspective, investment process, engagement, going back to what we were talking before, how is user voice embedded in the investment process as well, and then diversity data collection.
So as long as those spends stick with those criteria, we're not going to lose the control, the ability to use salary. Is that really so?
I think it's just for me, it's just an example of the broader point that what you got to do is develop models that just need to last for many years in a context where political change happens on a 4-year cycle, and that's just a general piece of like design, isn't it? And so it's things like making sure you've got cross-party political support at the outset, potentially, and thinking about having mechanisms in any contract that are kind of robust to withstand political cycles. I mean, before I was at Good Economy, I was at Grosvenor, which had about 350 years in property, so they've got quite a track record of, dealing with lots of different political changes over many years. So it's just part of that process, really.
That's stage. Don't you see a difference in terms of the community's views about DE&I?
I think they're more aware. I think they're more vocal. I think where we are, because as I said, we're at the coalface, and we're very lucky in a way because we're of a scale. We're a boutique. We're 50 strong, so we're not these huge behemoths that it's difficult to make change. And we're quite nimble. We can make change quite quickly. And one of the things we need to do to survive and to be successful as a business is reflect back the communities that we're working in. We need to look like them, to speak the same language, to understand the cultural diversity, and we do that. And if we didn't do that, we wouldn't necessarily be good at our job. So I think that we're quite lucky in the way that we focus on that. And I think it's recognised and it's appreciated that is the case.
And beyond these walls, I think we have a role to influence the wider supply chain. So part of our ESG procurement questionnaire for any suppliers that we're engaging with, you have some social criteria to be met. So these criteria, if not met, then this might be some of those are red spots that we should focus on. So yeah, influencing them as well to still keep the emphasis required on this agenda.
But whether it's internal or external, I feel like people internally, for example, people need to be able to recognise themselves and people that are in senior roles. It's no good to have policies and this, but they actually need to be able to see, that could be me in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
And I think that's true externally and internally.
And I think a big part of it is going behind the kind of current buzzwords, isn't it? It's like, a couple of years ago, it was all levelling up and now it's local investing or whatever. But fundamentally, it's the same stuff. And it's like when you go to a community, I imagine you don't say, let's talk about DEI. You say, let's talk about opportunities. Yeah.
I am quite open to this. Just got one of some questions. Anyone? In fact, I'm just make difficult on your point. I think reflection is really important. I'm a CEO associate at CMS Global Law Firm. One of the things I do struggle with is see myself reflected in this high position. And likewise, when you go and talk to the community, how can you make sure? Because I will naturally gravitate to somebody who comes from a similar background or looks like me, has similar experiences, so I can actually have an easy flow conversation. And you've mentioned about making sure when you go and talk in the community, you reflect the communities that you're going to. I suppose for sort of all the different types of sectors that you will come from, how do you manage that? How do you ensure that you are reflecting the community that you're trying to speak to? But also, how do we make sure it doesn't become just a tick box exercise? It's a great question.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is about understanding those communities in advance of going to see them, understanding what the cultural makeup is, understanding where the issues and sensitivities might lie, and choosing the right team to be part of those conversations. And we've got, one P&L, so we're not sitting there in our little teams going, no, I've got to do this project, you've got to do that one. So we're lucky that we can make sure that the teams we're going to put forward are the right ones. So I think from that point of view, it's a good starting point.
I think we talked about private-public partnerships, but there is a private-private partnership which helps to unlock those conversations. So take the example of PBSA's purpose-built student accommodation. We have the duty, for instance, to partner with the university for them to include some social mobility criteria in their own application for students, so they can help us allocate the socially rented units within our PBSA to the right people in a fair way. So these kind of conversations and the private partnerships would help. Another one would be with developers. So we mentioned Section 106. Unfortunately, this is great, but there is no accountability beyond the post-completion of the project. So by having this partnership with them, we will be able to take on board their own commitment that they made and then have continuity plans and some impact metrics to follow up with. Yeah, exactly. So this private partnership is not to be undervalued, because that is success.
And I think if you get into that mindset, it's then thinking about when you do the community engagement, it's not something you do to get over a planning hurdle. You're creating a bit of social capital, which you then pass on to the long-term stewards of the scheme. So it's that mind shift then makes it easier to see. No. Yeah, and that. Yeah.
I think the reason why we've all kind of got over the conversation about DEI being subject at the time, so is that the roots are so strong, and all the organisations here and all the organisations talk to people, we can't unpick it. We don't want to unpick it, and that's really, really important as we think as we look forward. Any last questions before I round up like our panel?
So Joy, you mentioned kind of the chronic climate challenge and how that impacts negatively on social mobility. I wanted to take us back to COVID times and how that's a kind of an acute moment in time that had impacted social mobility. You had children learning from home, potentially without a laptop or iPad, which could significantly impact their education and their further education. So I'm wondering whether, as an organisation or for business, how have any of you considered those impacts at time, and I guess mitigating against for correct for incidences like the COVID pandemic?
Well, great question. It's like, do you want to start? I think obviously during COVID, what we did, we had to evolve pretty quickly with community engagement, and the more traditional techniques didn't necessarily work. I think we've all moved into a much more sophisticated world of community engagement now, with community outreach and being much more creative, and working with community champions and things like that. But there definitely is still an overhang that people are more withdrawn. People are less willing to have those conversations and get involved. So we are having to work doubly harder to bring those people into the conversations. And I think certainly we've got a great team at Kanda called who very much focus on some of those community workshopping and that sort of thing. But it is more of a challenge for sure. We definitely have to work harder.
I would say the COVID time, if it taught us anything, is resiliency is key, and future proofing our decision making. So having not just the short or medium or longer term within the fund life cycle, but even beyond that, to assess impact. So take the example I mentioned, electrification of heat and how this might impact affordability or security. We have the duty to have some scenario modeling to future-proof decision making by forecasting increase in energy prices and how this will impact, especially in the ones where we have affordable units or social rented homes. So this future scenario modeling to future-proof our own decision making is key, and this is what was emphasized during COVID.
I think there's a really interesting, one of the things that COVID kind of revealed was what the levels of community resilience were actually like to start with. And I think that's an underexplored topic. And I think it's clearly, community resilience is not something an investor can come in and fix, but it is something where if you see there's a gap there, a vulnerability, it's something you can try and work out who are the organizations on the ground or the groups or the people, individuals, and who could really help, reinforce that and support them. But because I think that's something that it's one of those things where you only see the value of it in a crisis, and by the time the crisis happens, it's too late. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting, probably another whole seminar on that.
I think it probably is. I think it's really, really interesting. I think just to finish that conversation, we've also got to recognise that what we think is great community is very different to what great community is in different communities, and we've got to be agile to that and responsive to that. And I'm going to put it on time, because otherwise I'll get really sold off. And so I just wanted to thank the audience. In my favourite game, which is kind of panel bingo, these are the words that I'll take away: social mobility with attitude, resilience and future proofing, and private partnership, I think, is genius. That kind of like the value of social impact. Those are all really, really important things. What we wanted to do today in this panel was not have a conversation about going out to schools and talking about social mobility. That's something that's just happening. We have to collectively in this group think about all the things we talked about now that genuinely and positively can impact on social mobility across our age. What we can do and how we can make money out of it, which means that actually our plan to make money out of it means that actually it will accelerate change for good. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to my panel. I think they did a great job, and thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate your pocket.